The salt-filled air clung to everything aboard the USS Vigilant by 0500 hours. Eleanor wiped her weathered hands on a cloth that had once been navy blue. The familiar weight of her mop balanced perfectly in her grip. 7 years she'd been here. 7 years of proving herself one floor at a time in a world that still saw janitorial uniforms and assumed invisible. The massive aircraft carrier sailed through the Pacific waters like a floating city, its deck stretching nearly 3 football fields in length. Home to over 5,000 sailors, the Vigilant was the pride of the fleet, a technological marvel of American military might. But even the most sophisticated warship in the world needed someone to keep it clean. Eleanor Jenkins moved through the lower engineering decks with practiced efficiency. At 58, she was at least 2 decades older than most of the crew, her silver-streaked hair always neatly tucked beneath a standard-issue cap. To most officers passing by, she was just another member of the custodial staff, someone to nod at politely before forgetting entirely. But Eleanor saw things others didn't. 17 years in the Navy as an engineering specialist before a back injury had forced her into early retirement and eventually this civilian contractor position. She'd helped design cooling systems for vessels, just like this one before bureaucracy and budget cuts had restructured her department. Now she pushed a mop instead of drafting blueprints, but her trained eye never stopped noticing what others missed. The primary coolant exchange chamber hummed with activity as Eleanor worked her way around the massive equipment. While wiping down the access panel, her fingers detected a subtle vibration, a barely perceptible tremor that shouldn't have been there. "Morning, Ellie," came a voice dripping with familiarity. Lieutenant Commander Victor Harrison strode into the chamber, like he commanded not just the engineering section but gravity itself. Tall, square-jawed, with insignia that caught the light just so, Victor had perfected the art of appearing important wherever he went. Behind him trailed Ensign Melissa Parker, already smirking at Eleanor's presence. "Chief Engineer Commander." Abigail Chun hurried over with her ever-present digital tablet. At 45, Abigail had mastered the delicate dance of military protocol. Keep the officers happy. Keep the systems running. Keep your career advancing. Victor's eyes swept the chamber and landed on Eleanor. "We've got maintenance staff doing inspections. Now, I asked for qualified personnel to prepare for tomorrow's readiness evaluation." Eleanor didn't look up. She'd learned long ago that visibility often came with unnecessary complications. She continued cleaning around the coolant exchange valve, her movements deliberate and precise. Each stroke of her cloth was an extension of decades of knowledge, speaking a language she'd been fluent in since the Naval Academy, learning at Admiral Jenkins' side before he passed away. "She's on the regular cleaning schedule, sir," Abigail offered. "Just routine maintenance before the Admiral's inspection tomorrow." Victor cocked his head with exaggerated curiosity. "Cleaning? That's what we're calling system inspections now. What's her clearance level anyway?" The silence stretched uncomfortably. Not Abigail, not Melissa, not even Lieutenant Patel, sorting through diagnostic readouts nearby, offered an answer. Eleanor brushed a strand of silver-streaked hair from her forehead. "There's a microfracture forming in the secondary coolant exchange." "Manifold," she said quietly, not turning around. "I noticed it during my rounds this morning. Might want to run a pressure test before the system reaches critical load." Victor raised an eyebrow as if she'd just claimed to communicate with sea creatures. "You found damage our state-of-the-art diagnostic systems missed. Not likely." "Not damage yet," Eleanor clarified, still calm. "A potential stress point developing just before the CX-7 exchange valve. You won't notice it until the system reaches maximum capacity during full-throttle operations." Melissa chuckled. "Sounds like someone's been eavesdropping on the engineers' conversations." Eleanor met her eyes briefly, then looked away. She'd had this conversation before in different engine rooms, with different officers who wore their dismissal like custom-tailored uniforms. Victor tilted his head, studying Eleanor like an unusual specimen he'd found in his coffee. So let me understand. You, standing there with a mop and cleaning supplies, think you know more about this carrier's coolant exchange system than our level 8 diagnostic computers? I'm saying the hairline fracture won't register on standard diagnostics, Eleanor replied. The integrity is still above 94%. But when you push to full capacity during tomorrow's readiness drills, that percentage will drop rapidly. Thermal expansion under maximum load will widen the fracture. Melissa barked out a laugh. Let's hope she's not responsible for cleaning the flight deck too. Hate to see what maintenance issues she'd find up there. Abigail laughed too, but it sounded hollow performative. All right, let's move along. Lieutenant Commander, I'll have Ensign Parker handle the pre-inspection checks. Eleanor, you're cleared to finish the lower decks and then move on to Officer Country. That was it. Not a consideration of her warning, not even a courtesy inspection. Just a smooth dismissal, practiced and efficient. Eleanor picked up her cleaning cart. No one made eye contact as Victor clapped Melissa on the shoulder. Glad. We've got actual engineers on this. I'd hate to see a multi-billion-dollar vessel compromised because someone wanted to play mechanic. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eleanor moved past the diagnostic station, past the knowing looks and careful silences, toward the maintenance elevator where her supply cart waited. Outside, through a small porthole, the endless Pacific stretched to the horizon, waves cresting and falling with rhythmic certainty. Eleanor didn't head for the officers' quarters as directed. Instead, she made her way down to sublevel C, where the noise of the massive ship's propulsion systems drowned out everything else. In the shadow of auxiliary power units stood an old storage locker with a faded "Authorized Personnel Only" sign. The metal door creaked as she opened it, revealing not cleaning supplies, but a collection of precision tools nested in foam-lined cases. These weren't standard issue equipment. Every calibration device was digital hybrid, every testing probe rated for military-grade systems. They'd cost more than her monthly contractor salary, but they were hers. She'd kept them from her previous life when her name meant something in naval engineering. At the bottom of her case lay a worn leather notebook, its pages filled with meticulous diagrams and calculations. Eleanor flipped to a fresh page and began sketching the coolant exchange chamber, marking the exact location of the microfracture she'd observed. Her notations were precise, the kind of detailed analysis that came from decades of experience. The fracture point wasn't random. It matched a pattern she'd seen twice before on similar vessels, a stress point created by the conflicting demands of the new high-efficiency turbines installed during the carrier's last refit. The Navy had opted for a faster implementation schedule rather than the additional reinforcement her original team had recommended. Eleanor knew she couldn't address the commanders directly. Her contractor status gave her access to the spaces. She claimed but no authority to submit official reports. The chain of command was clear, and custodial staff didn't offer engineering assessments to senior officers. Instead, she slipped her notebook back into its hiding place and continued her official rounds. But her mind was calculating, planning, preparing for the moment when theory would collide with reality. That evening, long after most of the crew had retreated to their quarters, Eleanor sat in the small break room allocated to civilian staff. Her tablet displayed the official schematics for the USS Vigilant's coolant system, publicly available documents that showed the approved design, but not the actual implementation with all its compromises and shortcuts. Petty Officer First Class Michael Rivera wandered in, rubbing bloodshot eyes after a 16-hour shift monitoring the carrier's electrical systems. He paused when he saw Eleanor studying the diagrams. "Little light reading before bed?" he asked. Nodding at the tablet, Eleanor closed the screen. Just curious about how things fit together. Michael dropped into the chair across from her, nursing a cup of coffee that had likely gone cold hours ago. You were an engineer before, weren't you? I heard some of the older guys talking. Eleanor looked up, surprised that anyone had bothered. To learn anything about her past. A lifetime ago. Navy? 17 years. Specialized in thermal exchange systems for capital ships. Michael whistled low. No kidding? Why are you pushing a mop? Eleanor finished for him. Life. Happens. Injuries, reorganizations, early retirement. Then you need income and end up where you can. Michael studied her with new interest. But you still notice things. Like that coolant system you mentioned this morning. Old habits, Eleanor said, suddenly cautious. Comments like that could cost her this job, and civilian contractor positions weren't easy to come by at her age. The thing is, Michael said, lowering his voice, I've been monitoring some unusual temperature fluctuations in that same section. Nothing that trips the alarms, but definitely outside standard deviation. I logged it, but Chun said it's within acceptable parameters. Eleanor felt a spark of vindication mixed with concern. How long? 3 weeks. Gets worse during high-intensity operations. 3 weeks of warning signs ignored. 3 weeks of a growing problem that the ship's leadership had decided wasn't worth investigating. Eleanor had seen this pattern before, not just on vessels but in organizations. Problems denied until they became catastrophes. Expertise dismissed until disaster made it impossible to ignore. You should submit another report, she suggested. Michael's laugh was bitter. Already did. Twice. Got told to focus on my assigned systems and leave coolant management to the specialists. Eleanor nodded, understanding all too well. Sometimes the system doesn't want to hear what it needs to hear. Yeah, well, tomorrow's readiness drill will push everything to maximum capacity. If there really is an issue. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Eleanor returned to her small quarters that night, a converted storage space barely larger than a closet. Accommodation deemed appropriate for civilian custodial staff. She pulled out her notebook again, reviewing her observations and calculations with the methodical precision that had once made her one of the Navy's most respected engineering specialists. The microfracture wouldn't just leak coolant, under maximum load, with full thermal expansion and the additional stress of rapid power fluctuations during battle readiness drills. It could rupture catastrophically. Best case, localized flooding and emergency shutdown of affected systems. Worst case, cascading failures across multiple critical systems. Eleanor sketched a bypass regulator, a simple but elegant solution that could be installed quickly to reduce pressure on the compromised section without disrupting the overall system function. It wasn't a permanent fix, but it would prevent failure during tomorrow's drills and give the ship's engineers time to implement a proper repair. She couldn't fabricate the part herself, not without access to the machine shop and materials that required authorization she no longer possessed. But she could document the solution, present it one more time, and hope someone would listen before it was too late. Morning arrived with the characteristic efficiency of naval operations. The USS Vigilant hummed with pre-inspection activity, officers in pressed uniforms striding purposefully through corridors, enlisted personnel making final preparations for demonstrations meant to impress visiting admirals. Eleanor moved through her usual cleaning routine with quiet determination. When she reached the engineering section, she found Commander Chun already there, tablet in hand, reviewing system readiness reports. "Commander," Eleanor said, approaching with appropriate deference, "may I speak with you about the coolant exchange manifold?" Abigail looked up, annoyance flashing across her features. "Eleanor, we're preparing for an admiral's inspection." "Whatever. Cleaning concerns you have can wait until tomorrow." "It's not about cleaning. It's about the microfracture I noticed yesterday. Under maximum load conditions, Stop. Abigail raised a hand. I appreciate your diligence, but we've run complete diagnostics. All systems are functioning within parameters. The inspection team will be here in less than 2 hours, and I need my people focused on real issues. Eleanor felt the familiar weight of dismissal. Commander, I've designed systems like this. The fracture won't show on diagnostics because it's still maintaining pressure, but when you initiate full power, that's enough. Abigail's voice sharpened. You're a civilian contractor hired to clean, not to analyze million-dollar systems you haven't been trained on. Please complete your assigned duties and leave engineering assessments to qualified personnel. The words stung with their familiar bite, the same dismissal she'd faced time and again, since trading her officer's uniform for custodial coveralls. As if knowledge and expertise disappeared the moment rank and title were removed. Eleanor nodded once and returned to her cart. She had tried the official channels, had attempted to warn them through proper procedures. Now she was out of options. Except one. As the inspection team prepared to board, Eleanor made her way to the small workshop where Michael maintained electrical testing equipment. He wasn't their likely call to help with last-minute preparations elsewhere but his workstation remained unlocked. Eleanor moved quickly, accessing the maintenance logs with the efficiency of someone who had once written the protocols for such systems. She created a new diagnostic flag, not an alarm that would trigger immediate response, but a monitoring alert that would force the system to perform an automated pressure test on the coolant exchange chamber before pushing to maximum capacity. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't even against regulations, strictly speaking. It was simply a prudent safety precaution that should have been standard procedure anyway. Eleanor set the test parameters, closed the terminal, and returned to her cleaning duties just as alarms began to sound across the carrier. Battle stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The readiness exercise had been converted to a simulated combat scenario standard procedure for impressing visiting brass. The ship would now push all systems to maximum capacity, performing complex maneuvers while demonstrating weapons readiness and damage control procedures. Exactly the conditions that would stress the compromised coolant section to failure. Eleanor continued mopping, moving closer to the main engineering control room as officers rushed past. Through the open doorway, she could see display screens flashing with system status reports. Commander Chun stood at the central console, coordinating with various stations as the carrier began to accelerate. Push into 85% power, an engineer announced. All stations report ready, another called. Initiating weapons system power-up sequence. The ship hummed with increasing energy as massive turbines spun faster, generating the enormous power needed to drive the carrier through water at battle speed while simultaneously powering its complex array of electronic systems. Then, just as the readiness drill reached its crucial phase, a different alarm sounded, the one Eleanor had programmed. A yellow warning flashed on the auxiliary display. Pressure anomaly detected. Coolant exchange manifold section C7. What's that? Victor demanded, pointing at the warning. Abigail frowned. Automated diagnostic flag. Systems requesting a pressure test before exceeding 85% capacity. Override it, Victor ordered. We're in the middle of a readiness demonstration with half the Pentagon brass on the observation deck. Abigail hesitated. Sir, protocol requires. I know the protocols, Commander. We ran full diagnostics yesterday. This is probably a sensor glitch. Override and proceed. Eleanor watched from just outside the doorway, invisible in her custodial uniform yet seeing everything. The moment stretched as Abigail's fingers hovered over the override command. Sir, a young engineer spoke. Up, the flag is specifically for the coolant exchange manifold. If there's a real pressure anomaly. There isn't, Victor snapped. Execute the override. That's an order. Abigail nodded, inputting her command code. The yellow warning disappeared, replaced by the steady green indicators of a system allegedly functioning normally. The carrier continued accelerating, pushing toward full battle readiness. Eleanor knew what would happen next. She'd calculated it precisely, had seen the consequences of similar decisions play out before. She could already feel the subtle change in vibration through the deck plates as the coolant system struggled with increased thermal load. 7 minutes. That's how long it would take for the microfracture to expand beyond critical tolerance once maximum load was applied. 7 minutes until failure began, followed by cascading system damage that would disable a multi-billion-dollar warship and potentially endanger thousands of lives. Eleanor set down her mop and walked purposefully toward a maintenance access panel near the rear of the engineering section. No one questioned her presence. Custodial staff were expected to clean everywhere, including during drills. The access panel led to a service corridor running parallel to the main coolant distribution system. Inside, the noise was deafening. The roar of machinery pushed to its limits, echoing through metal chambers designed for function rather than comfort. Eleanor moved with the confidence of someone who had helped design these spaces, navigating through narrow passages until she reached Junction Box C7, exactly where her calculations had predicted the fracture would be most vulnerable. Already, the metal housing was hot to the touch, far hotter than specifications allowed. A thin wisp of steam escaped from the scene where the microfracture had begun to expand under pressure. In minutes, it would rupture completely. Eleanor opened her cleaning cart and pulled out not cleaning supplies, but the precision tools she'd kept hidden for years. There was no time for proper authorization, no time for work orders or command approval. There was only the imminent failure and her ability to prevent it. Working swiftly, she bypassed the standard access protocols and opened the junction housing. The pressure inside was dangerous, superheated steam capable of causing severe burns, but her movements were confident and precise. Eleanor installed a temporary pressure diverter, a simple but effective modification that would redirect excess pressure away from the compromised section, allowing the system to function at reduced efficiency rather than catastrophic failure. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't even officially approved, but it would work. Eleanor sealed the junction box just as the first major pressure spike hit. Her modification held, channeling the dangerous excess through auxiliary pathways she'd helped design decades earlier. The coolant system shuddered, adjusted, then stabilized at 92% efficiency, enough to continue the demonstration without risking the ship. She returned to her cart and resumed mopping, her face betraying nothing of what she'd just accomplished. Through the doorway, she could see the momentary confusion on the engineers' faces as system readings fluctuated, then stabilized at slightly reduced levels. Power fluctuation in the coolant exchange, reported an ensign. Efficiency dropped to 92%, but holding steady. Abigail frowned at her console. Run a diagnostic. System shows no critical failures, but there's something odd in the pressure distribution. It's like the system reconfigured itself, Victor scowled. Is it stable enough to complete the demonstration? Yes, sir. Reduced efficiency, but well within operational parameters. Then continue. We'll investigate after the Admiral's inspection. Eleanor continued cleaning, moving methodically through her assigned areas while the readiness demonstration proceeded. The carrier completed its maneuvers successfully, though. Engineers noted several performance metrics slightly below expected standards. The visiting admirals were impressed nonetheless, congratulating the ship's leadership on a well-executed demonstration. No one connected the minor performance issues to the warning flag that had been overridden. No one except Michael Rivera, who found Eleanor in the mess hall that evening. Interesting gay, he said, sliding into the seat across from her. Coolant system developed an unexpected bypass configuration during the drill. Strangest thing exactly. Where you said there might be a problem. Eleanor continued eating her dinner. Is that right? The thing is, Michael continued, lowering his voice, I checked the maintenance logs. No authorized personnel accessed that section during the demonstration. Yet somehow, a catastrophic failure was averted by what Chief Engineer Chun is calling an unexpected system adaptation. Eleanor met his eyes. Sometimes problems solve themselves. And sometimes, Michael said, studying her with new respect, someone solves them and doesn't take credit. I'm just the cleaning staff, Eleanor reminded him. I don't have authorization to access critical systems. Michael nodded slowly. Of course. Must have been a fortunate coincidence. 3 days later, as the USS Vigilant continued its patrol, rotation in the Western Pacific, a formal investigation into the coolant system anomaly was launched. Engineers discovered the microfracture exactly where Eleanor had identified it, now significantly expanded but safely managed by an unconventional but effective bypass configuration that no one would admit to installing. Commander Chun stood in the engineering bay, staring at the modified junction box while Lieutenant Commander Harrison paced behind her. This modification isn't in any official manual, Abigail said, studying the elegant simplicity of the solution. But it saved us from a major system failure. Victor scowled. What I want to know is who accessed restricted systems without authorization. That's a serious breach of protocol. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing, Abigail admitted. This isn't amateur work. This is the kind of solution that comes from deep system knowledge. Eleanor continued her cleaning routine nearby, invisible as always. She moved her mop in slow, methodical strokes, listening but never acknowledging the conversation. This wasn't the first time her unnamed contributions had saved equipment, though never something as significant as an aircraft carrier. That evening, Admiral James Harrington, commander of the Carrier Strike Group, requested a full briefing on the coolant system incident. Senior officers gathered in the main conference room, reviewing technical reports and system analyses while trying to determine how a potentially catastrophic failure had been averted through unauthorized means. The bottom line, Commander Chun explained, pointing to simulation models on the main display, is that had we continued pushing the system to maximum capacity, we would have experienced a complete coolant exchange failure within minutes. The resulting damage would have disabled multiple critical systems and potentially compromised the entire propulsion network. Admiral Harrington's expression remained neutral, but his eyes were sharp. And this was averted by a mysterious modification that no one authorized and no one will take credit for. Yes, sir, Abigail confirmed. The modification shows exceptional understanding of our systems beyond textbook knowledge. It's almost like it was designed by someone intimately familiar with the original engineering. Do we have any leads on who might have done this? The Admiral asked. Lieutenant Commander Harrison cleared his throat. We've questioned all engineering personnel with access to that section. No one admits knowledge or involvement. Admiral Harrington drummed his fingers on the table. Let me understand this correctly. Someone on this ship identified a critical fault that our diagnostic systems missed, implemented an effective solution without authorization, potentially saved this vessel from significant damage, and now no one knows who did it. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Perhaps, the Admiral continued, we should be less concerned with protocol breaches and more interested in finding someone with this level of expertise. I'd rather have them working officially than performing unauthorized repairs, however effective they might be. That night, as Eleanor made her final rounds through the deserted corridors of the massive carrier, she encountered Petty Officer Rivera again. He was carrying a tablet displaying technical specifications. She recognized immediately her own modification. Engineering's going crazy trying to figure out who installed this, he said without preamble. They've interviewed every technician on board. Admiral Harrington himself is involved now. Eleanor continued cleaning, her expression neutral. Sounds serious. It is, but here's the thing. They're not looking to punish anyone. The Admiral called it initiative that saved his ship. He wants to find whoever did it and put them on his engineering staff. Eleanor paused, her mop suspended mid-stroke. That would be quite a promotion for someone. It would. Michael studied her carefully. Especially if that someone was currently pushing a mop instead of using their actual expertise. Their eyes met in silent understanding. Hypothetically, Eleanor said quietly, what would happen to a civilian contractor who accessed restricted systems without authorization, even if the outcome was positive? Michael considered this. Hypothetically, it would depend entirely on who was making the determination. Some officers might focus on the breach of protocol. Others might care more about results and expertise. And Admiral Harrington? The Admiral has a reputation for valuing competence above almost everything else. Michael hesitated. He also served with a Commander Eleanor Jenkins about 20 years ago, Engineering Division. I heard him mention the name during the briefing. Said she was one of the best thermal system specialists the Navy ever had. Eleanor's hands tightened around her mop handle. She hadn't heard anyone speak her former title in years. Must be a coincidence, she said finally. Must be, Michael. Agreed, but his expression suggested otherwise. You know, tomorrow there's going to be a full engineering inspection of that coolant system. 900 hours. Anyone with relevant expertise might find it interesting. The following morning, Eleanor arrived for her shift at the usual time. She collected her cleaning supplies and proceeded to her assigned section, which happened to include the engineering bay where the inspection was scheduled. As she quietly mopped near the entrance, officers and senior engineers gathered around. The modified coolant junction. Admiral Harrington himself stood at the center, his weathered face serious as Commander Chun explained the technical aspects of the unauthorized modification. What's most remarkable, Abigail was saying, is how this solution addresses not just the immediate fracture, but the underlying design stress that caused it. Whoever did this understood not just how to patch the problem, but how to redistribute the thermal load to prevent recurrence. Admiral Harrington nodded thoughtfully. And still no one has claimed responsibility? No, sir. We've questioned everyone with engineering clearance. The Admiral's eyes scanned the room, moving past officers and technicians until they settled. Just for a moment on the elderly woman, quietly mopping in the background. Something flickered in his expression, a hint of recognition quickly masked by professional detachment. Continue your investigation, Commander. I want to know who on my ship has this level of expertise. He turned to leave, then paused beside Eleanor. For a moment he said nothing, merely studying her with the careful assessment of someone who had commanded men and women for decades. Cleanliness is important on a ship this size, he said finally. Thank you for your service. Eleanor nodded respectfully. Just doing my job, Admiral. He held her gaze a moment longer than necessary. Are you? I wonder. As the Admiral departed and the engineering team continued their inspection, Eleanor maintained her invisible routine. But something had changed. A recognition had passed. Between them brief, unacknowledged, but undeniable. For the first time in years, someone had looked at Eleanor Jenkins and seen not just a janitor, but the possibility of something more. The investigation continued for days, with engineers studying the modification and security personnel reviewing access logs. Eleanor continued her cleaning duties, saying nothing, making no claims. But as she worked, she began leaving her notebook. In specific locations, open to diagrams that offered solutions to other minor issues she'd observed throughout the ship. First, a schematic for improving ventilation efficiency in the lower decks. Then, calculations for optimizing fuel consumption during standard patrol patterns. Small contributions that someone with the right expertise would recognize as valuable. breadcrumbs leading toward a truth she wasn't quite ready to claim openly. Michael found her one evening as she finished cleaning the officer's mess. "Your notebook's causing quite a stir. Commander Chun found it in the engineering library yesterday. Thought it had been left by one of her team until they realized none of them understood half the calculations." Eleanor continued wiping down. "Tables. Maybe someone's trying to be helpful." "Maybe," Michael agreed. "Or maybe someone's finally ready to stop hiding." Eleanor paused, considering his words. 7 years of invisibility had become a habit, a protective shell she'd built around herself after the disappointments of her previous career. Stepping back into the light meant risking that same dismissal, that same bureaucratic burial of expertise that had pushed her into early retirement in the first place. "What if they're not hiding?" she asked quietly. "What if they just learned that some contributions are only accepted when no one knows where they came from?" Michael leaned against the bulkhead. "Admiral Harrington is different. He's been asking questions about you specifically. About why a former Navy commander with engineering specialization ended up as a civilian contractor pushing a mop." Eleanor felt a chill run through her. "What did he find out?" "Not much. Your records are classified beyond his immediate access. But he's persistent. And what happens when he learns the truth? That I was forced into retirement after challenging cost-cutting measures that compromise system integrity. That I filed official reports predicting exactly the kind of failures we're seeing now. Reports that were buried to protect contracts and careers." Michael straightened. "Maybe that's exactly what he needs to know." 2 days later, as Eleanor cleaned the observation deck, she found Admiral Harrington standing alone, gazing out at the endless Pacific. He didn't turn as she entered, but his posture indicated he was aware of her presence. "Do you know what the most dangerous thing on a warship is, Miss Jenkins?" he asked, still facing the ocean. Eleanor set down her cleaning supplies. "Not what?" "Sir, who? The most dangerous person on a warship is someone who values protocol over purpose, rank over reason, or career over capability." Now he turned, a smile touching the corners of his mouth. "I served with a commander who said almost exactly that many years ago. Brilliant engineer. Uncompromising integrity. Career ended after she refused to certify systems she believed were compromised by budget constraints." "Sounds like someone who understood her responsibilities," Eleanor replied carefully. "Indeed." The Admiral studied her openly now. "I've been reviewing some interesting reports. Unauthorized modifications to critical systems. Engineering notebooks filled with solutions to problems we didn't know we had. And a civilian custodian with an uncanny knack for being in exactly the right place when systems need attention." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "The cleaning staff goes everywhere, Admiral. We see everything. Some see, few understand." He stepped closer. "I need to know who modified that coolant system. Ms. Jenkins, not for punishment, but because I need that kind of expertise working officially, not from the shadows." For a long moment, Eleanor said nothing. 7 years of careful invisibility weighed against the opportunity to reclaim her purpose, to be valued for her knowledge rather than her ability to make floors shine. "The modification isn't perfect," she said finally. "It's a temporary solution. The entire coolant exchange system needs to be reconfigured to address the underlying stress patterns. The current design prioritized rapid installation over thermal stability, creating inherent weaknesses that will continue to manifest under combat conditions." Admiral Harrington's eyes widened slightly, not with surprise at her admission, but with the confirmation of what he'd already suspected. "Commander Jenkins," he said quietly, using her former rank, "I believe we have much to discuss." The following morning, Eleanor did not report for her usual cleaning duties. Instead, she found herself in the Admiral's private conference room, surrounded by senior engineering officers and ship's leadership. Her worn notebook lay open on the table, surrounded by official technical manuals and system schematics. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Harrington began, "I'd like to introduce Commander Eleanor Jenkins, former head of Thermal Systems Design for the Atlantic Fleet Modernization Program. She will be helping us address several critical issues with our carrier's operation systems, beginning with a complete assessment of the coolant exchange network." The stunned silence that followed was broken by Lieutenant Commander Harrison's incredulous voice. "The janitor?" "Sir, with all due respect, Commander Jenkins has been working as a civilian contractor in our custodial department for the past 7 years," the Admiral continued smoothly. "During that time, she has identified numerous system vulnerabilities that our standard diagnostics missed, including the coolant exchange fracture that could have disabled this vessel during our recent readiness demonstration." Commander Chun stared at Eleanor, recognition and shock battling across her features. "You're the one who installed the bypass? But how did you even access the restricted areas?" "The better question," Admiral Harrington interjected, "is why?" Someone with Commander Jenkins' expertise was pushing a mop instead of leading our engineering division. And the answer to that question reveals a failure not of security, but of our ability to recognize and utilize expertise regardless of rank or position. Eleanor opened her notebook to a detailed diagram of the carrier's primary cooling system. "The issue isn't isolated to the junction that failed," she explained, her voice confident and clear. "It's systemic. The current configuration prioritizes power generation over thermal stability, creating stress points throughout the distribution network. I've identified 7 additional locations where similar failures are likely under sustained high-output conditions." The room fell silent as senior officers studied her diagrams. There was no dismissal now, no patronizing smiles or skeptical glances. There was only the dawning realization that they had been sharing their ship with an unrecognized expert who understood its systems better than they did. "I've been maintaining unofficial logs of system performance for all major engineering components," Eleanor continued, producing additional notebooks from her bag. "Each one contains observed anomalies, projected failure points, and proposed solutions based on actual operational patterns rather than theoretical models." Admiral Harrington surveyed the room. "Commander Jenkins has agreed to serve as special engineering advisor to this carrier group, effective immediately. Her first task will be implementing a comprehensive solution to the coolant system vulnerabilities before our deployment to the South China Sea next month." "Lieutenant Commander." Harrison shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, there are protocols for bringing civilian contractors into advisory roles. Security clearances, formal evaluations, all already in place," the Admiral interrupted. "Commander Jenkins never lost her clearances, and her evaluations are on file from 17 years of distinguished service. The only protocols that concern me are the ones that allowed us to waste her expertise for 7 years while she cleaned our floors." As the meeting continued, Eleanor felt a strange mixture of vindication and trepidation. This was what she had wanted to be heard, to have her expertise recognized, to contribute meaningfully to the ship she had quietly protected for years. But part of her had grown accustomed to invisibility, to the freedom of solving problems, without navigating the bureaucracy that had once driven her from service. Michael found her later that day in what had been designated as her new office, a converted storage room hastily cleared of equipment and furnished with a desk and computer terminal. "So the secret's out," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Commander Jenkins returns from the shadows." Eleanor looked up from the system schematics spread across her desk. Not quite a triumphant return, more like a reluctant draft. "The whole ship's talking about it. The janitor who saved the carrier. Some of the junior officers think it's an urban legend." "Let them," Eleanor said. "The truth is less dramatic. I saw a problem, I fixed it. Anyone with the same training would have done the same." Michael shook his head. "That's where you're wrong. Most people with your knowledge wouldn't have spent 7 years pushing a mop. waiting for the moment when their expertise was critically needed. I wasn't waiting, Eleanor corrected him. I was working. The fact that no one recognized the value of that work says more about them than about me. The first sign of change came within days of Admiral Harrington's announcement. Eleanor's small office, formerly a storage closet, became a hub of reluctant consultation. Junior officers arrived first, tiptoeing around her expertise with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. They came with hypothetical questions and left with solutions they'd present as their own discoveries. Eleanor allowed this, understanding that transformation happened one mind at a time. Commander Chun appeared in her doorway one afternoon, digital tablet clutched tightly in hand. The chief engineer's usual confidence had been replaced by something closer to defensive professionalism. The Admiral has asked me to consult with you on the implementation schedule for the coolant system modifications, Abigail said stiffly. I've prepared a preliminary timeline based on standard protocols. Eleanor accepted the tablet, scanning the meticulously formatted document. 12 weeks for full implementation? That's optimistic considering we're doing this during active deployment. It follows established engineering schedules for capital ships, Abigail insisted. On paper, perhaps. But paper doesn't account for the realities of working around combat readiness requirements. Eleanor made several adjustments, reorganizing the workflow sequence. If we integrate the modifications with standard maintenance cycles and prioritize the highest risk junctions first, we can have the critical sections completed within 4 weeks. The remainder can follow during routine service intervals. Abigail studied the revised schedule, her expression tight. This approach bypasses several verification stages. It accelerates them, Eleanor corrected. The standard protocol was designed for shipyard implementation, not field modifications during active duty. We don't have that luxury. Their eyes met, a silent battle of expertise and authority. Eleanor had the knowledge, but Abigail had the position. After a long moment, Abigail took back the tablet. I'll review your suggestions and discuss them with Lieutenant Commander Harrison. The coolant exchange fracture wasn't an isolated incident, Eleanor said as Abigail turned to leave. It's part of a pattern I've been documenting across the propulsion and cooling networks. If you're interested, I can show you what to look for. Abigail paused in the doorway. Are you suggesting my engineering team isn't qualified to identify potential failures? I'm suggesting that sometimes expertise comes from unexpected sources, and dismissing information based on its origin rather than its accuracy puts this ship at risk. The words hung between them, a challenge, an offering, and a truth that cut to the heart of the Vigilant's unspoken culture. I'll keep that in mind, Abigail said finally, and left without another word. The modifications began the following day. Eleanor found herself in the unexpected position of directing senior engineers through procedures she had designed, but was technically unqualified to implement. The paradox wasn't lost on the crew, and whispers spread through the carrier. Lieutenant Commander Harrison supervised with barely concealed resentment, checking and double-checking every specification with the determined skepticism of someone looking for mistakes that weren't there. This junction configuration violates standard Navy engineering protocols, he announced loudly after inspecting the first completed modification. It's completely unorthodox. Eleanor approached calmly. The protocol you're referencing was designed for the previous generation of cooling systems. The Vigilance hybrid configuration requires a different approach. Are you suggesting Navy engineering standards are outdated? Victor's voice carried just enough to ensure everyone nearby could hear. I'm suggesting they haven't been updated to reflect the realities of field implementation on vessels with mixed generation systems, Eleanor replied. The modification works because it addresses how these systems actually perform under stress, not how the manual says they should perform. Victor's face flushed with barely contained anger. This is exactly why we have standardized procedures. To prevent unauthorized improvements, based on individual judgment rather than tested protocols. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Those protocols were written by people like me, Commander. They're guidelines based on best understanding at the time, not religious texts. When the reality doesn't match the manual, smart engineers adapt. Michael Rivera, who had been assisting with the installation, poorly concealed a smile. Several other technicians suddenly became very interested in their work, avoiding eye contact with their superior officer. Victor leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You may have impressed the Admiral with your little emergency fix, but don't forget your place. You're a civilian contractor serving at our discretion." "Correction," came Admiral Harrington's voice from the entrance to the engineering bay. "Commander Jenkins is a special technical advisor serving at my discretion, and I'd appreciate if you'd focus on implementing her recommendations rather than questioning their validity." The silence that followed was absolute. Victor stiffened, then nodded sharply. "Of course, Admiral. Just ensuring all modifications meet proper standards." "I'm confident Commander Jenkins' standards exceed our requirements," the Admiral replied coolly. "Carry on." As Harrington departed, Eleanor felt the weight of every eye in the engineering bay. Victor's humiliation was public, his authority undermined. That would make him not less dangerous, but more so. Men like him didn't forget such moments. "Let's continue," she said quietly to the assembled team. Junction 7B is next on the schedule. Over the next 2 weeks, Eleanor's modifications progressed from reluctant implementation to cautious acceptance. The data was irrefutable. Each completed section showed improved efficiency, greater stability, and enhanced performance under stress testing. What had begun as an emergency fix was evolving into a comprehensive upgrade. Commander Chun found Eleanor late one evening, still working on simulation models for the next phase of modifications. The chief engineer's earlier hostility had mellowed into something closer to professional curiosity. "Your approach to the tertiary exchange modules is unorthodox," Abigail said, studying the diagrams on Eleanor's screen. "But the performance metrics are impressive. 15% improvement in heat dispersion with no additional power requirements." "Sometimes the best solutions aren't the most obvious ones," Eleanor replied, continuing her calculations. The original design prioritized component isolation to prevent cascading failures, but overdid the separation. "Systems need to breathe together, not just exist side by side." Abigail was silent for a moment, then asked the question that had clearly been bothering her. "Why didn't you speak up sooner, before the fracture nearly compromised the ship?" Eleanor looked up, meeting the younger woman's eyes. "I did, multiple times. To you, to Lieutenant Commander Harrison, to anyone who would listen. The question isn't why I didn't speak up, it's why no one heard me until a crisis forced the issue." The truth of that statement settled heavily between them. Abigail had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I remember you mentioning concerns," she admitted. "But you were the janitor," Eleanor finished for her. "And janitors don't know about coolant exchange manifolds or pressure tolerances or thermal expansion coefficients. Except I wasn't just a janitor, was I? I was the invisible expert you walked past every day while looking for solutions." Abigail's professional mask slipped, revealing genuine regret. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. We should have listened." "Apologies are easy," Eleanor said, turning back to her work. "Change is harder. The real question is whether you'll listen. Next time someone without rank or position tries to tell you something you need to hear." The following week brought the most challenging phase of the modification process. The primary coolant exchange chamber required a complete reconfiguration, work that would normally be performed in a shipyard with the vessel's systems powered down. Instead, they would need to implement the changes while maintaining operational readiness. The engineering bay hummed with controlled urgency as teams prepared for the delicate procedure. Eleanor had designed a sequence that would allow sections to be isolated and modified without compromising overall system integrity. But the margin for error was slim. Admiral Harrington called a briefing for all senior officers involved in the operation. Eleanor found herself standing at the front of the conference room, explaining procedures to the very people who had dismissed her warnings weeks earlier. The modification will be implemented in 5 stages, she explained, highlighting sections of the schematic displayed on the main screen. When no one wants to hear what you have to say, sometimes the best strategy is to find a position where you can observe without being observed, Eleanor said. I may have been invisible as a janitor, but I saw everything. And now? Harrington asked. Eleanor considered the question carefully. The easy path would be embracing her restoration, enjoying the validation and recognition that had been denied for so long. But she had learned important lessons during her years of invisibility about systems both mechanical and human, about how expertise was filtered through layers of politics and prejudice, about who was heard and who was silenced. Now I want to create a system where the next person like me doesn't have to wait 7 years and risk a catastrophic failure before their expertise is recognized, she said. The Technical Assessment Division shouldn't just be about me or this ship. It should be about transforming how we identify and utilize expertise throughout the fleet. Admiral Harrington smiled, a rare expression on his usually stern face. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. The following week saw a transformation aboard the USS Vigilant. Eleanor's team took shape, drawing members not based on rank or department, but on demonstrated competence and innovative thinking. Michael Rivera was among the first recruits, his ability to spot anomalies in electrical systems recognized at last. More surprising was the gradual shift in Commander Chun's attitude. The chief engineer began consulting Eleanor regularly, not just on coolant systems, but on a range of engineering challenges. Their initial tension evolved into professional respect, then cautious collaboration. I've been reviewing your notebooks, Abigail admitted during one late-night planning session. The observations you made while working as a contractor. You identified at least 12 potential system vulnerabilities that our standard diagnostics missed completely. Different perspective, Eleanor explained. When you're responsible for cleaning every corner of a ship, you notice patterns that might not be visible from a control station. Vibrations, temperature variations, subtle changes in operational sounds. They tell stories if you know how to listen. That's what we've been missing, Abigail realized. The integration of direct observation with technical knowledge. Our engineers rely too heavily on computer diagnostics and not enough on physical interaction with the systems they manage. Eleanor nodded. Expertise isn't just about understanding theory. It's about developing a relationship with the systems you're responsible for, knowing them intimately enough to sense when something isn't right, even before the instruments can detect it. This philosophy became the foundation of the newly formed Technical Assessment Division. Eleanor instituted regular walkabouts for all engineering personnel, time spent physically inspecting the systems they monitored, touching, listening, and developing the kind of intuitive understanding that couldn't be taught in a classroom. Not everyone embraced the changes. Lieutenant Commander Harrison maintained his distance, participating in the new protocols with minimal effort and maximum skepticism. Several senior officers who had been comfortable with the old hierarchies found the elevation of previously ignored expertise threatening to their authority. They'll adjust or they won't, Admiral Harrington said when Eleanor expressed concern about the resistance. But the results will speak for themselves. Those results became evident sooner than expected. 3 weeks into the new protocols, a junior electrician who had been part of Eleanor's walkabout training identified an anomaly in the carrier's communications, a rare subtle power fluctuation that occurred only during specific operational sequences. Standard diagnostics showed nothing unusual, but the technician insisted something was wrong. Under the old system, his concerns would have been dismissed. Under Eleanor's guidance, a thorough investigation revealed microscopic stress, fractures in critical connection points, damage that would have eventually severed communications during combat operations. The most important lesson you'll learn as naval engineers isn't about thermodynamics or pressure tolerances or power distribution networks, she began. It's about expertise, recognizing it, valuing it, and ensuring it's heard when lives depend on it. She told them her story, not as a personal narrative of injustice overcome, but as a case study in system failure. How vital information had been ignored because of its source rather than its accuracy. How hierarchy had superseded expertise. How the culture of compliance had nearly led to catastrophe. Your technical skills matter, she concluded. But equally important is your responsibility to create an environment where expertise can flow freely up the chain of command, across departmental boundaries, and especially from unexpected sources. Because the warning that saves your ship might come from a junior technician, a contractor from an allied nation, or even the person cleaning your workspace. As she finished, Eleanor saw in those young faces something she had almost forgotten during her years of invisibility. The idealism and determination of people who entered service believing they could make a difference, who hadn't yet learned to silence themselves for the sake of career advancement or organizational comfort. The Jenkins protocol isn't just about fixing coolant systems, she told them. It's about fixing how we identify, value, and utilize the expertise that exists throughout our organization. It's about creating a Navy where the best ideas win, regardless of who proposes them. The questions that followed weren't about technical specifications or implementation schedules. These young officers wanted to know how to navigate organizational resistance, how to advocate for expertise without committing career suicide, how to create space for unconventional thinking within a traditionally hierarchical structure. These were the questions Eleanor had been waiting for, the ones that addressed the real challenges of transforming not just machinery but mindsets. As the session concluded, a young lieutenant approached her, determination evident in her posture. "Commander Jenkins, I'm Victoria Chun, Commander Chun's daughter." Eleanor hid her surprise. "I didn't realize Abigail had a daughter in the service." "Mom doesn't talk about it much," Victoria said with a wry smile. "She wanted me to make my own way without her influence. But I wanted you to know she calls me every night to talk about the changes happening on the Vigilant. She's different. More energized, more passionate about the work than I've heard her in years." Eleanor nodded, understanding the significance of this revelation. Abigail Chun's transfer to Washington hadn't been just a bureaucratic maneuver to separate key players. It had been a strategic placement, putting a convert to the Jenkins protocol at the heart of Naval Engineering Command. "Your mother is an excellent engineer," Eleanor said. She just needed permission to prioritize expertise over protocol. Victoria's expression grew serious. "What they did to you, forcing you out, making you work as a janitor on the same ships you designed it, was wrong. But what you're doing now, using that experience to change the whole system instead of just reclaiming your position, it's inspiring." As Eleanor returned to the USS Vigilant the following day, she carried with her not just the official authorization for fleet-wide implementation, but something more valuable, the beginnings of a movement that extended beyond any single ship or system. The carrier welcomed her with a subtle difference in atmosphere. Word of her Washington triumph had preceded her, transforming what had been cautious acceptance into something closer to respect. Even those who had once dismissed her now sought her approval, conscious that the janitor they had ignored was reshaping naval engineering policy at the highest levels. Admiral Harrington met her on the flight deck as her helicopter touched down, the wind from the rotors whipping around them as they moved toward the island superstructure. "Congratulations, Commander," he said once they were inside. "You've accomplished more in Washington in 1 week than most officers achieve in a career." It's just the beginning, Eleanor replied. Implementation will be the real challenge. Already underway, the Admiral assured her. I've received directives from Naval Command authorizing immediate expansion of your team and priority resource allocation. Apparently, you made quite an impression on the Chief of Naval Operations. Eleanor nodded, but her mind was already working through the implications. Such rapid, high-level support was both a blessing and a warning. The Navy never moved this quickly without reason, and Eleanor suspected the motivation wasn't solely concern for coolant system integrity. Why the urgency, sir? What's changed? Admiral Harrington studied her carefully, then made a decision. Walk with me. He led her to his private ready room, secured the door, and activated the confidentiality field that prevented electronic eavesdropping. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels, he said. 3 days ago, the USS Constellation experienced a catastrophic coolant system failure during exercises in the Arabian Sea. The resulting cascade disabled primary and secondary power systems throughout the vessel. They're being towed to Qatar for emergency repairs. Eleanor felt a chill run through her. Eleanor laughed despite herself. That's one interpretation. It's the right interpretation, Maggie insisted. Don't get me wrong, having someone like you in the Pentagon matters. But they're hoping that by elevating you, they can contain you, make you part of the system instead of a challenge to it. You sound like Admiral Holden. Smart man. Probably why he's got those stars. Maggie leaned forward. Here's what they don't understand. The Jenkins protocol isn't just your idea anymore. It's a movement. And not just in the Navy. She pulled out a tablet and showed Eleanor articles from various publications, industry magazines, technology, journals, management reviews, all discussing adaptations of the Jenkins protocol being implemented in sectors ranging from healthcare to manufacturing to disaster response. Your approach to expertise making sure the right knowledge reaches decision makers regardless of source. It's spreading beyond military applications, Maggie explained. I'm part of a network now. People like me, in positions usually ignored, who have expertise that matters. We call ourselves Jenkins Whisperers. Eleanor felt a mixture of amusement and astonishment. Jenkins Whisperers? Because we whisper truths that need to be heard, just like you did. The janitor who saved an aircraft carrier and changed a system that needed changing. The impact of this revelation settled on Eleanor gradually. What she had begun as a personal response to a specific challenge had evolved into something far larger, a fundamental reconsideration of how expertise was recognized and utilized throughout organizations beyond just the military. Take the promotion, Maggie advised. But remember that your real power isn't in your rank. It's in showing people like me that our knowledge matters, that expertise doesn't care about uniforms or titles, or who gets invited to important meetings. 1 week later, Eleanor stood before the Secretary of the Navy and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the culmination of a journey that had taken her from dismissed engineer to janitor to ship's captain, and now to the threshold of flag rank. Captain Jenkins, the Secretary began, your achievements aboard the USS Constellation have demonstrated the extraordinary potential of your approach to organizational effectiveness. We are proposing the creation of a new position, Director of Operational Excellence, with the rank of Rear Admiral. Your responsibility would be implementing expertise-driven protocols throughout naval operations worldwide. Eleanor listened as they outlined the position, the authority, the resources, the opportunity to institutionalize the changes she had pioneered. It was, by any conventional measure, the pinnacle of career achievement, especially for someone who had spent years cleaning floors after being forced from service. This is quite an honor, Mr. Secretary, she said when they had finished, and I'm grateful for the recognition. But before I accept, I need to be clear about my conditions. A subtle tension filled the room. Flag officer appointments didn't typically come with conditions from the appointee. The Jenkins Protocol isn't just a technical system, Eleanor continued. It's a comprehensive approach to identifying and utilizing expertise throughout an organization, especially expertise that challenges conventional thinking or comes from unexpected sources. She looked directly at the secretary. If I accept this position, I will need complete authority to implement the protocol without dilution or compromise. That includes restructuring reporting relationships, creating direct channels between technical specialists and decision makers, and establishing protection for those who raise concerns outside traditional hierarchies. The secretary exchanged glances with several of the Joint Chiefs. That's a significant departure from established command structures, Captain. Yes, sir, it is, Eleanor agreed. Just as the results we've achieved aboard the Constellation represent a significant departure from established performance metrics. You can't have one without the other. Admiral Holden, seated among the Joint Chiefs, allowed himself a small smile. Eleanor Jenkins had come full circle from the officer who had been silenced for speaking uncomfortable truths to the leader, who now made listening to such truths a condition of her service. There's one more condition, Eleanor added. The Jenkins Protocol must include formal recognition of expertise at all levels of the organization, including civilian contractors and support personnel. The people who clean our ships, maintain our facilities, and perform the essential work that often goes unnoticed. They see things others miss. Their observations and insights need pathways to reach decision makers. The secretary considered this for a long moment, clearly weighing the political and organizational implications against the demonstrated results. Your conditions are accepted, Captain, or should I say, Admiral Jenkins. The Navy needs your expertise, and apparently, we need it on your terms. 2 years into her tenure as Director of Operational Excellence, Eleanor stood on the observation deck of the USS Intrepid Museum in New York Harbor. The decommissioned aircraft carrier now served as both historical monument and educational center, but today it hosted a different kind of history-making event. Below her, on the flight deck, hundreds of military personnel, civilian contractors, and government officials gathered for the official launch of the Federal Expertise Recognition Program and expansion of the Jenkins Protocol beyond military applications into civilian agencies ranging from FEMA to the FAA, NASA to the Department of Energy. What had begun as a solution to a specific technical problem aboard one carrier had evolved into a government-wide initiative to ensure that expertise could flow freely throughout organizations, regardless of source or hierarchical constraints. Michael, now Captain Rivera, with his own command, joined her at the railing. Quite a view, he remarked, looking out over the gathering. From janitor to this in 5 years. Some might call it a meteoric rise, Eleanor smiled. Others might call it an unnecessarily delayed recognition of existing expertise. Always the optimist, Michael teased. Speaking of recognition, have you seen who's here? He nodded toward a group near the podium. Among the officials in formal attire stood several people in maintenance uniforms, custodial staff, groundskeepers, facility maintenance workers. Their presence at such a high-profile event was unusual, to say the least. Maggie's idea, Eleanor explained. She insisted that if we're launching a program about recognizing expertise regardless of position, we should visibly include the people most often overlooked. Jenkins whisperers? They prefer Essential Expertise Network officially, but yes, they've been instrumental in identifying system vulnerabilities across multiple agencies, everything from cybersecurity weaknesses to infrastructure stress points that traditional assessment methods missed. The ceremony began with the usual speeches, officials praising innovation and adaptation, leaders claiming credit for transformative initiatives. Eleanor listened with the patient tolerance of someone who understood that public narratives rarely captured the complex reality of institutional change. When her turn came to speak, she approached the podium with the same quiet confidence she had once brought to cleaning floors and fixing coolant systems. The Federal Expertise Recognition Program isn't about creating new experts, she began. It's about recognizing the expertise that already exists throughout our organizations, expertise that often goes unheard because it doesn't come through expected channels or from traditional sources. She gestured toward the maintenance workers, standing among the officials. Some of our most valuable insights come from people who see our systems every day from perspectives that managers and executives ever experience. The person cleaning your office may notice patterns in equipment behavior that your sensors miss. The maintenance worker in your facility may identify structural weaknesses before your inspectors arrive. Eleanor paused, making eye contact with various sections of the audience. This program creates pathways for that expertise to reach decision makers without being filtered, dismissed, or ignored because of its source. It recognizes that knowledge doesn't care about uniforms or titles or degrees. It matters only that it's accurate and timely. As she concluded her remarks, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From Navy commander to dismissed whistleblower, from ignored janitor to carrier captain, from organizational outsider to institutional change agent, each phase had taught her something essential about systems, both mechanical and human. The technical problems she had identified years ago were now being fixed systematically throughout the fleet. The organizational barriers that had prevented expertise from reaching decision makers were being dismantled across government agencies. The cultural transformation, teaching people at every level to value knowledge regardless of its source, was gradually taking hold in institutions, once defined by rigid hierarchies and inflexible protocols. After the ceremony, as dignitaries networked and photographers captured carefully orchestrated moments, Eleanor sought out the maintenance staff who had attended the event. They gathered around her without the hesitation or deference typically shown to someone of her rank, a sign that the culture was indeed changing. On behalf of all the personnel who keep this ship clean and functioning, we wanted to thank you. Not just for the ship or the protocol, but for showing that everyone's contribution matters, everyone's expertise counts. Eleanor was moved by the gesture, this spontaneous recognition from the very people whose potential had been so often overlooked throughout naval history. Thank you, Petty Officer Cortez. But remember, the Jenkins Protocol isn't about me. It's about creating spaces where expertise can flourish, regardless of rank or position. That's your responsibility, now all of you. To maintain not just the ship's systems, but the culture that allows every voice to be heard when it matters. As the helicopter lifted off, Eleanor watched the USS Jenkins grow smaller below her, a floating city of 5,000 souls, each with unique knowledge, each with observations that might prove critical in unexpected moments. The ship would sail without her, implementing the principles she had established, adapting them to new challenges, evolving them through experience. This was the true test of her life's work, whether the changes she had initiated would outlast her direct involvement. 2 weeks later, Eleanor sat in a congressional hearing room, explaining the Jenkins Protocol to legislators considering its implementation across federal agencies. The questions were probing, sometimes skeptical, occasionally hostile, particularly from representatives with defense contractor connections, who saw the protocol's emphasis on frontline expertise as a threat to established procurement patterns. Admiral Jenkins, began Congressman Williams, his tone suggesting he had identified what he believed was a fatal flaw. Your approach seems to undermine traditional authority structures that have served our military well for centuries. How do you respond to concerns that the Jenkins Protocol creates confusion about who's in charge? Eleanor had heard this objection countless times, in various forms, from those who confused authority with expertise. Congressman, the Jenkins Protocol doesn't change who has authority to make decisions, she explained patiently. It changes how information reaches those decision makers. In traditional hierarchies, Expertise often gets filtered, diluted, or lost as it moves up the chain of command. By the time information reaches the person with authority to act, it may be incomplete, inaccurate, or too late to be useful. She displayed a slide showing performance metrics from vessels operating under the protocol compared to those using traditional structures. The results speak for themselves. Ships implementing the Jenkins protocol show 37% higher operational readiness, 42% fewer system failures, and 28% improved mission completion rates. Authority remains clear, but decisions are now informed by unfiltered expertise from throughout the organization. A freshman Congresswoman Representative Sophia Washington, herself a former military officer, leaned forward with evident interest. "Admiral, beyond the operational improvements, have you observed any changes in personnel retention or satisfaction in units implementing your protocol?" "Excellent question," Eleanor replied, appreciating the insightfulness that suggested Washington had actually read the full briefing materials. "We've documented a 34% increase in re-enlistment rates among technical specialists serving on vessels using the Jenkins protocol. Exit interviews indicate this is directly related to feeling their expertise is valued and their observations taken seriously." The hearing continued for hours with questions ranging from implementation costs to security implications to cultural resistance. Throughout, Eleanor maintained the same patient clarity that had characterized her approach from the beginning, explaining complex systems in accessible terms, focusing on results rather than theory, and always emphasizing that the protocol was about recognizing expertise that already existed rather than creating something new. When the session finally concluded, Representative Washington approached Eleanor as she gathered her materials. "That was masterful, Admiral," the Congresswoman said. "You've made a compelling case for transformation, not just in military operations, but potentially throughout government service." "Thank you, Representative. The principles are applicable anywhere expertise needs to reach decision makers efficiently." Washington nodded thoughtfully. "I have a background in emergency management. During disaster responses, I often saw critical information from field personnel get lost or distorted before reaching command centers. Lives were lost because the person with the most accurate understanding of ground conditions couldn't get their assessment to the people coordinating resources. That's exactly the kind of scenario the Jenkins protocol is designed to address," Eleanor confirmed, "creating direct channels for expertise when time-critical decisions are needed." "I'd like to propose a pilot implementation in FEMA," Washington suggested. "Start with regional response teams and document the results. If it works as well there as it has in the Navy, we could have a framework for government-wide adoption." This was how transformation spread, not through mandates or directives, but through individual champions who recognized the value and adapted the principles to their own contexts. That evening, as Eleanor prepared for a dinner honoring the original crew of the USS Vigilant, the ship where her journey from janitor to admiral had begun, she received an unexpected message. Admiral Holden, now retired but still influential in naval circles, requested a private meeting before the event. "Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us."